Renee Stout, and I'm part of the leadership team for the WCAPS Climate Change Working Group. I'll be the moderator for today's Climate Careers webinar. So thank you everyone for joining us today. We hope that this series provides an opportunity to share how to find and explore careers in climate spaces and to help encourage you, whether you're a student, entry-level, or mid-career professional. Our goal with this series is to share how to begin working in or transition to a climate-focused career. And the mission of the WCAPS Climate Change Working Group is to create a space for discussion and dialogue for women of color on climate-related challenges and initiatives. Our goal is to provide a platform where women of color can participate in discussion on climate-related issues, in addition to building a network where organizations and experts in the field can share solutions on how best to save and heal our planet. In our last session, we explored climate-related careers in infrastructure, which was an incredibly insightful webinar focused on highlighting a sector that is so vital in helping cities to adapt to be more sustainable and resilient to climate change effects. Today, we will have the last of our 4-part climate career series, where we hope to share multiple entry points to careers that support and build awareness of climate change issues, as well as build stronger policies and systems to protect our world. During this session, you'll see a Q&A box where you can share additional questions, comments, and ideas during the conversation, and we'll try to address as many questions as possible at the end of our discussion. So before we start, I'm very honored to introduce our wonderful speaker, Marsha Michel. Marsha Michel. Marsha Michel is an analytical leader and problem solver with 15+ years experience in leading teams, managing budgets ranging from $100 to $200 million, building and implementing programs and strategies that effectively respond and prevent natural disasters, and advancing health equity, food insecurity, and nutrition amongst the most vulnerable. She's worked in West Africa, Latin America, and the Caribbean, and most recently South Asia, where she has worked to foster and advocate for equity and inclusion. Ms. Michel serves on the board of the International Career Development Program. She volunteers as a mentor for the mentoring program for WCAPS and is a liaison coordinator for the Climate Change Working Group. She currently works as an independent consultant. In January 2022, she was selected as a Presidential Leadership Scholar, which is a high-profile partnership among the presidential centers of George H.W. Bush, George W. Bush, William J. Clinton, and Lyndon B. Johnson for leaders with a commitment to helping solve society's greatest challenges. This leadership program connects with thought leaders in the study of leadership and benefits from insights of former presidents and staff. In addition, it focuses on the importance of building and maintaining intentional relationships, strategic partnerships, and the art of persuasion. Most recently, she was selected as part of the International Career Development Program, which is a professional development and leadership program for highly promising mid-career professionals in international affairs in the United States, which is sponsored by the Joseph Corbell School of International Studies. She holds a BA from Wheeling Jesuit University in West Virginia, and an MA from the American University in Washington, D.C. She speaks fluent French, Spanish, some Portuguese, and Italian, and she enjoys cooking, baking, reading, and traveling. So thank you again, Marsha, for joining us.
Thank you so much, Renee, for such a warm introduction. It's a pleasure to be here.
So before we begin with our questions, Marsha, I just want to set the stage for our discussion. The reason why we want to have these conversations is because climate is a broad and diverse field. You can enter this sector from multiple paths, either from STEM through the tech and innovation approach, through a policy and international relations background, and even through a human rights background. The possibilities are really endless, and yet climate as a sector remains a niche and unconventional career option in many regions. And as such, people have to often rely on international and foreign country organizations and offices for jobs. Getting access to information on how to approach these work opportunities and the scope in the field has been a struggle that all of us have faced. Through our Climate Career series, we wish to make a make information regarding climate-based careers accessible to people and provide a support system that helps them enter this field of work. So thank you again. It's an honor to have you. For our first question, as we begin, can you help us understand the intersections that you have seen between the humanitarian work you've completed and climate change?
Sure, absolutely. Thanks for the question. As a humanitarian, I responded to and manage humanitarian disasters, manage food insecurity, malnutrition program, work with refugees and internally displaced population due to natural disasters or conflict. And so climate change can contribute to humanitarian crises and can create new conflict dynamics. Let's say, for example, there's a drought, right? Areas that used to be farmed or produce food are no longer arable, right? And no longer can produce the any food. It can cause food shortages and price increases. For example, prolonged drought can cause disruption in, for example, traditional herd management. And this is an issue we've seen particularly in the Sahel, as farmers and herders are utilizing the same space to get water because it's scarce. So it can create conflict when herds encroach on cultivated areas. For example, Eastern Africa is going through severe drought, right? The protracted drought is forcing families to leave their homes in search of food and water, putting their health and safety and education at risk. Um, it's over 20 million people, including 10 million children in places like Djibouti, Ethiopia, Kenya, and Somalia, or needed water and assistance throughout 2022. In Ethiopia, for example, in 2021, the Kenyan authorities estimated 4.3 million Kenyans living mostly in arid and semi-arid areas face severe food insecurity because of below average rainfall across 4 consecutive rain season. Um, and it's said to be the worst drought in decades, right? It's killing livestock and creating a new humanitarian crisis that is driven mostly by climate change, right? And it's creating tension, it's creating civil strife as shepherding communities battle each other for resources. Now, this year, it's estimated that the numbers have risen to 5.4 million people in Kenya without access to adequate food, water. And that's the prediction is until June this year, and then it will be reevaluated to see what's been happening. In my most recent position, I was an advisor to the refugee response in Bangladesh. And so when you hear about the Rohingyas who left Burma, fleeing persecution, they took refuge in Bangladesh, but Bangladesh is one of the most prone disaster countries in the world, and the refugees are located in an area that is flooded, um, that cause human disasters. They lose their shelters, they lose human life. And so, as a humanitarian response, you can't just think about sort of providing food for the refugees, right? You have to think about innovative ways to protect them from the areas where they leaving as well. And this situation is not just affecting refugees; it's affecting the local population as well.
Um, so a follow-up question then, what does this say about the idea of climate change and intersecting career choices?
Sure. I mean, I think we touched a bit about this already. But I think climate change is in everything that we do, right? And it's affecting more and more people, not just overseas, but the US as well. We've seen increased tornadoes, increased floodings in areas where there weren't. Um, and we've seen snow in parts of the country that normally wouldn't have snow in areas that would have, don't have it. For example, I'll give an example, for example, of a health person working overseas on a malnutrition program, right? When you think about it, what do you think about, right? When you hear malnutrition, well, they don't have access to food, but what causes the lack of access to food? It might be because of drought, because of lack of arable areas to produce the food. And so an understanding and having an understanding of the drivers of this, what's causing malnutrition, to create better programming to address the issue. For example, I worked in Afghanistan for more than a decade ago, right? And a lot of the international communities, right? We build schools, we build hospitals, we build government structures for them to have meetings and all these things. But one of the drawbacks of what we built were that the buildings were needed generators, right? To in harsh summers. But I thought of what if we had sort of climate advisors during those times to sort of help us build better infrastructures, right, that respond to the environment, but leave less of a footprint, right? And so I think there is space in everything that we do to create a better and better environment.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. It is interesting to hear how closely linked they are, and that there is you're seeing a need, at least, for people who are interested in working in climate to come in. So our next question, can you tell us more about your journey into the climate space and what led you to the world of humanitarian work?
Sure, absolutely. I think initially I wanted to do development work. I was new to it. I wasn't sure exactly how to get in. So, I mean, I took classes. I worked closely with my advisors to guide me. And I think it was an internship with the State Department right after college that sort of clarified what I really wanted to do. So I got an internship. I worked at the State Department in DC, and then later on, I got to go to the embassy in Panama and work there. That was before getting my master's, and so that sort of offered me a landscape of what I wanted to do. And so initially I started right after my master's, I moved to Haiti and started working there. And there I was working on economic development programs, creating jobs, to create more stability because there were a lot of political strifes throughout the country. And so I was in a field office working, but the landscape in Haiti was quite difficult, right? And it's very hard for an international organization to sort of create long, sustainable jobs. And so I found myself debating in terms of my next steps. I loved the work that I did. I worked a lot on deforestation projects. I built roads, I built hospitals, which were amazing things that I was able to do. But at the same time, I was a bit disillusioned by sort of the development work, and decided to get into humanitarian response. We're working more on sort of solutions to disasters and responding to the immediate need after a disaster.
It's interesting how you've kind of had your hand in a lot of different areas. So with that in mind, what kind of skills do you think you've developed over your career journey?
Sure. That's a really, really good question. I think when entering that skill, well, the first step is you need a master's degree, right? And overseas experience, and definitely language skills. And I think the things that I've developed more over the years are my soft skills, right? Coming from the US, making sure that I'm not coming as if I'm here to totally change people's cultures and environment. Having an understanding of cultures, respecting people's cultures and differences. Definitely having a lot of empathy and respect in those areas that I work. Because a lot of times when you go into vulnerable communities, um, people treat you very differently, and being open to saying I'm here to work with you, I'm a foreigner, and that I'm willing to learn from the things that you've been doing to solve your own problems, and bringing solutions together, and not just as a foreigner just dumping things on people. And so in the skills that I've developed along the way, definitely empathy, listening skills, sitting down in a community, listening to them talk about their issues and how we can support them in providing solutions.
Okay. That's good to hear. We always learn that we need to learn a language. We do need to have that overseas experience, but the soft skills are definitely, I think, a bit more. That's what makes you stand out when you are applying for jobs or, trying to break into the field. So empathy, I think, is one of the bigger ones that it's kind of hard to develop, but once you have it, you're a star in the field. So in the humanitarian work that you've done, you shared that you've participated in disaster relief and food insecurity. In what ways do you think these areas will be further adversely impacted by climate change?
Yeah, unfortunately, I think the situation will get worse before it gets better without significant investment in sustainable climate change solution in those areas. I mean, look at Kenya, right? That the number of people in need of food has risen because of the drought. I think we used to experience drought every decade or so. Now, there's countries, it's every 2 to 3 years. So it's becoming more frequent, the issues that we're seeing, right? For example, Bangladesh that I worked in is a disaster prone country that is vulnerable to food shortages, right? With, I think, 15% of the population classified as food insecure, and we see the continuous cycle of frequent disasters, such as especially during the rainy seasons, right? And if you look at Bangladesh, I think 75% of the country is underwater. And so it is estimated that by 2050, I think it's 11% of its land will be underwater by 2015. So what are the sustainable solution that is being invested in place, like Bangladesh, that is very populous, right? And that is hosting as well quite a number of refugees that they're supporting. And so I think continuously bringing up the issues, raising the issue, and trying to find sustainable more investment for countries to deal with climate change impact.
And this is a question I've just thought of, but do you think that this is more important just for the global south, or is there room or opportunity in developed countries in Europe and the US to build climate resiliency?
I think so. I think especially, I mean, I'm looking at the situation in the US and it's critical as well, right? That it's not just, and I think we just think it's an issue in the South. No, it's an issue for everybody. We're breathing the same air, right? I think once we start looking at it as a common problem, I think more and more common solution will be available. I mean, I look at the US in places where there are increased tornadoes, there increased floodings. We've seen a lot of floodings in California last year. These are things that will continue to happen. And so, yeah, very good question. Thank you.
Of course. So in your opinion, do you believe or do you think that climate resiliency is just a humanitarian issue, or is it a development issue? Is it a gray area?
That's really a good question, a very interesting one because it's something that we dealt with, right? I think at the beginning, climate change was a development thing. That's how we saw it in this space, right? But I think as more and more we're dealing with climate change disasters, right? Food insecurity, for a number of years. I think it has forced the humanitarians and the development to sit down and talk more and more as to create programs that maybe now it's a humanitarian issue, but transitioning to the development space for longer, more sustainable solutions. For us humanitarians, sometimes we come into a space and it might be we need to end this, right? We're not looking at specifically the long term, right? When Ebola first happened, I deployed, and the idea was to provide programming that would deal with the immediate infected people, right? And maybe the long term development goal was to create stronger health infrastructure for these countries to deal with these type of health crises, right? And so now I think more and more we can't have should not have be having the debate whether it's our space or not, right? I think it's common problems, and I think the more we sit down together, the development side and the humanitarian side, I think we can find better, more resilient solutions to the situation that we are that are increasing.
That goes back to the interconnectedness of everything. And
Absolutely.
now I'm wondering if there's a job that combines humanitarian work and development together.
Just imagine having that sort of background, right? You're responding to the humanitarian crisis of maybe immediately feeding, providing support to people in Kenya who are infected by drought. But the longer term is how do we deal in creating more access point to water, right? Working with government and local authorities to create these spaces for communities who tend to move a lot to find water, food, to be able to do that.
Great. So in this space, should we consider it a place of opportunity for career growth?
Absolutely. There's so many possibilities and opportunities for people who are in the humanitarian space to do climate change related work. And I think we've mentioned a lot of it, whether you have health background, whether you have an engineer background, right? How do you use sustainable materials in places that are deforested, right? To do more construction to support vulnerable communities. Um, so there is that space.
And within this space, do you think that this work offers opportunities for more diverse backgrounds and experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the more diverse, the better. Having the language skills, either because you grew up speaking it or you learned it, right? Or because you also lived in an environment that suffered from climate change and you have the hands-on experience to bring that to the space. So it is an opportunity for more diverse groups of people to be part of the dialogue, to be part of the discussion, and yeah, to be able to make a change.
It's encouraging because we often feel like our backgrounds kind of hinder us from being able to work, especially with government or international organizations. So it's very nice to hear that, the things that I've gone through could actually be an asset in the future.
Absolutely. Good
Yeah.
point.
What do you envision to be the future of this sector?
Um, for the humanitarian work, I think, I mean, when I first entered my work, is the thing we would say is to take myself out of work, right? But it's hard to do um, because of the landscape, because there are continuous disasters, whether it's natural or man-made, and so it's a continuous thing that we have to do, unfortunately, whether it's in the US or in the global south outside.
Thank you for that. Um, so my last kind of question is, what advice would you have for members of our audience who are students trying to break into the humanitarian aid space?
Sure, it can be difficult. Definitely try to get experience. And so when studied abroad. I grew up sort of speaking Spanish because it was all around, and then got to study abroad in Spain. So I definitely got to master a language skill. I grew up speaking French. I'm Haitian American. So I grew up speaking French and Creole, and now I added another language, right? So definitely try to get the abroad experience and the language skill. I had an internship with the State Department. I interned in DC at the State Department, and then I got to work at an embassy. So these were amazing opportunity that I took advantage, and that looked really great on my CV. But I got to experience living in a different country in Europe and also in Panama. And so bringing these skills is an advantage. And so study abroad, internships, fellowship, if you are able to. I think we have some, for example, USAID has internships as well. There are different type of fellowship. During grad school, I got a Born Fellowship and got to study Portuguese and lived in Brazil. And so there's a lot of resources that I would suggest people to really research and take advantage of.
And do you have any links or any specific organizations that you could recommend to our audience?
Sure. I mean, I mentioned USAID has internships, the State Department. I did the State Department and loved it, right? So you have the Boren Fellowship, it's undergrad and graduate as well. You have the Payne Fellowship, which is graduate. And all these are fellowship in international affairs type related. There's the Wrangle. So there are a lot of resources out there. And so I think my colleague Farhana will share those in the link in the chat box.
Yes, and thank you for Hannah for sharing that as well. So our last question, what advice would you give for those interested in working in countries outside of the ones they were born and raised in?
I'm sure. I think there's a lot of opportunities. Some of these internships that I mentioned can provide you an opportunity to go overseas and work or to research. I forgot to mention Fulbright as well. Right. And so there are a lot of opportunities. I think I mentioned some of the skills. If you can do speak the language, I think it helps in connecting with people. It helps in understanding the context. I always find it so much better when I'm talking directly to somebody instead of having another person translating or helping me understand what is being said. And definitely respect for cultures that is outside of yours, and a lot of empathy and patience. I think as American, we're always running and rushing, and in other places, it's just a different way of doing things. And so keeping those in mind when going overseas.
And for a student who is from a marginalized background, what would you say to them if they're just getting started in trying to build up
Yeah,
these skills and experiences?
yeah, definitely. I think it can be hard. For me, I mean, going through um be patient with yourself, don't get frustrated. Try to take advantage with if there are career services in your college, university. Try to find out about these resources. I think I was lucky. I went to a very small school. There were six of us in the international program. And so I got to learn and hear about different opportunities. One of my professors had applied to become a foreign service officer at the State Department. He passed the test, but he didn't go into it. And so I learned about the State Department. I applied for an internship and got the internship. And so definitely perseverance. Sometimes you might need to apply once or twice or three times, and it's okay.
Mhm,
But keep persevering in your goals and the things that you want to achieve.
mhm. And it's true, you never know if they're what they're looking for specifically in the first time you apply to the third time you apply. So just keep sending your application and see what happens.
Yeah, absolutely. For example, the Boren, I applied before going into grad school. The first time I didn't get in. And when I got into grad school, I applied again and I got it. And um, so keep at it.
Yeah. Thank you for that. And thank you for sharing all of your insights on approaching a career through the lens of humanitarian work and aid. It's really encouraging to hear that you've had such an enriching career path and the process you've taken to get there. So it's very inspiring, especially as a woman of color, using your background as an asset for your work. I know for myself, I tend to kind of try to suppress that and just push my Americanness out, but it's good to hear like I can be myself and probably also have a successful career. So with everything that's been said, we have received a few questions and comments from our audience, which I'm sure we would love to hear your insights on, Marsha. So with that, our first question for discussion, how has being multilingual helped you in your work and building your career? Do you have any advice for people wanting to learn languages?
Absolutely. It has been a great asset. I mean, I worked in West Africa. I work in the Democratic Republic of Congo, and there I was the regional program officer for the Republic of Congo, Central African Republic, and Republic of Congo. And I spoke French. And so I could travel on my own, meet with partners, and at times talk to community members who spoke French. Sometimes their local language that I was not familiar with, but I had the opportunity to learn a bit about Lingala or Swahili when I lived in Congo. And so for me, it's an amazing asset to have. In Bangladesh, it was a bit difficult because the Rohingyas have a particular language. Um, there's some similarity with Bangla, but it's quite different. And so it was very difficult to talk directly to the to the Rohingyas, right? I could communicate through someone, but it can be challenging when you don't. It just it opens so many doors when you know the language, not just to do your work, but culturally to go to a local music festival, to be able to communicate with people. It opens door, it opens your vulnerability, your ability to make friends in different places. And in terms of learning, I mean, take classes at school, that's one step. And I think we're fortunate in the US that depending on the communities that you live in, like for example, Spanish is all around me. So I'm always listening to it, even if I don't have somebody immediate to me that speak the language, right? um Take classes. If you have cable, use those cable networks to practice your French or your Spanish or your Portuguese. I know when I first moved to Congo, I was a bit hesitant, but my French came back immediately, right? And then the cable that I have was in French. So I was able to hear, and it made it so much better. Some of the fellowship and internship programs that I mentioned provide language. For example, Portuguese. I knew a little bit about Portuguese, but the Boran paid for my classes to learn Portuguese and paid for me to go live in Brazil for several months. And so look at those opportunities. Fulbright is another opportunity. And going to the embassy in Panama helped me practice my Spanish. And so look for opportunities to speak a language.
And once you learn a language, is it easier to learn other languages after?
Yes, it's much easier. So I grew up speaking French, easier to pick up Spanish and Portuguese. And I know some Italian that I picked up in Afghanistan. So it's easy once you know one, and to pick up others as well.
It's good to hear. And pay attention in your classes. 'Cause I definitely did not in high school. So our next question, has mentorship or connections helped you with finding opportunities? I know you mentioned you worked with your advisor in your undergrad.
Yeah. Definitely, right? Definitely, if you can find, I know it can be tricky and to go ask somebody for help, but definitely try to find mentors. Keep in touch with your advisors, especially at the beginning when you're applying for these programs for them to support you. But if you do meet somebody who is in that sector, try to connect, right? Try to sign up for a group that is in your field where you meet more people in those field, connect on LinkedIn and try to keep in touch. So mentorship has been a big part of my life, which is the reason that I volunteer to WCAPS to sort of support others who'd like to get into the same field as well.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Our next question is very interesting. Is there much scope of computer technologies in this space? And if so, how do we use these technologies in an environmentally friendly way?
Um, is there much space for computer technology? I think there is space for technology in general to in the humanitarian space. I think about sort of technology to transfer money to refugees or people who've been displaced, right? Because refugees, if they go to another country, they don't have the proper documents. It might be difficult for them to have access to money or anything like that. And so creating technology in cooperation, collaboration with the local government for them to be able to receive cash transfers, right, to help them support themselves. I think of technologies that to create cleaner waters because a lot of times people who are moving from one place to another due to natural disasters or conflict, um, or going to places that may not have the infrastructure to provide clean water. So affordable, sustainable solution for clean water, regardless of where you are, that can help as well. I'm thinking of medical technologies to provide support in cases where hospitals are destroyed and all these things, thinking about what's happening in Turkey and Syria in the aftermath of earthquake, providing relief and support.
And so the person who asked that question is actually a software developer. So I can see how there might be that possibility to bring those skills over into the environmental sector. Our next question, how have you been able to deal with racism as a woman of color and being a humanitarian in a climate space?
Yeah, I mean, it's an excellent question. It's I think something that I've learned over the years to deal with. I mean, I remember times I applied for a position that would be internal position at work, that had skills, language skills requirements, and that I wasn't chosen for that position, but the person who was chosen didn't have the skill language. And I think also working overseas, how people view you as a person of color, also can be difficult in some instances, also as a woman, right? And so I think it takes a lot of patience and skills to figure out how to deal with the situation. I mean, I didn't get the job, but I continued to apply and it didn't work out. I changed offices where I got the opportunity to work in a francophone country because I wasn't getting the opportunities where I was currently working. It's definitely, it can be very discouraging and hurtful. And I think it's not giving up, is to continue pushing, opening the barriers. I remember when I first started, I didn't see a lot of people who looked like me in this space. And I'm grateful that I see more and more women of color, especially in the humanitarian space. But I think there needs to be more of us to be at the table, to be in the discussion when we're talking about disaster impact on community and women. Um, and so it's always hard to deal with, but continue pushing to change the space. That's all we can do.
Thank you for that. So with your experience of dealing with disasters and crisis, how do you keep a sense of hope for the future?
You have to have hope. It can be hard. The devastation, and look at what happened in Turkey and Syria. It's devastating, right? And it hurts, but we have to have hope that we're more able to deal with those natural disasters. And I think what I hope to come out of Syria and Turkey is sort of better legislation and better accountability to creating better infrastructure. I think one of the issues is that people were getting permits left and right and did not build sort of infrastructures that could stand the impact of an earthquake like this. And so hopefully better accountability, uh, building back better in those countries, right? Because Turkey in those areas, it will remain an area prone to earthquake. And so I have hope that humanity is good, that there are a lot of people working to change this world, and that more of us will be part of those spaces to make sure that change happens. And so always have hope.
Very encouraging. Hope is all you can have.
Yeah.
So the last question I believe we have, what sort of skills have you picked up that can be transferable in other areas?
Yeah, I definitely my soft skills, sort of making sure that I'm listening to the communities that I'm supposed to help, right? Not just taking everything for granted, reading reports and saying this is what's happening, but talking to people who are impacted in those areas that I've worked in, and being open-minded, right? Being open-minded to local solutions, because as foreigner, I don't always have the solution, and being open-minded and respectful to traditions of the people in those countries that I work in. I think these are the skills will be always transferable to other places, right? Having empathy, compassion, and always listening to the others before jumping into conclusion, and working with people with differing views and opinions, because there are a lot of times I had to do a lot of convincing when I'm putting out a strategy or budget, as to why we needed to do this program, why should we fund it, why it's important, and things like that. And so I think, yeah, my soft skills have increased a lot, and I'm glad for these skills. Yeah.
Thank you. So we actually have another question, kind of on the same vein. As a grad student, how have you been able to maneuver your way dealing with a difficult faculty member?
Ooh, that's a good question. I don't know. Did I have a really, um, I don't know. I don't think I had a really hard faculty member. I think grad school was hard because I was working 2 or 3 jobs at the same time. So it was very difficult to sort of participate in outside lectures that were not part of my coursework. I think the work was really demanding, but there was no way to get out of it. I definitely took advantage of office hours if I had issues or difficulties in in doing a project. I think I had a lot of projects, and they were group projects, which meant that it was particularly hard because I had 3 jobs, so I didn't have a lot of free time to do it. And so I had to cancel a lot of work hours to be able to participate um in those group projects because they were part of my coursework. There was no way out of it. And so definitely took advantage of office hours and talking and meeting with them, trying to develop a relationship, although I didn't have the time to make sure that they understood where I was coming from and if I needed an extension, that I could do that. And so I think at the end of it, they were aware that I was a very hard worker and that I could do the work and delivered. But unfortunately, or fortunately for me, I didn't have really a difficult professors to deal with in grad school. The work was demanding that I had to keep up with. But they were all really kind people to work with.
Yeah, and grad school is hard enough without dealing with a difficult person. I think on right now I'm in grad school doing my PhD, and I think the only advice on that end is, like you said, developing a relationship with them, because if they can see the humanity in you, they're less likely to try to snuff it out unless they're completely sadistic, but that's another story. But thank you for sharing that as well.
Yeah.
So I don't think we have any more questions at the moment. So we'll just conclude, and I'm very excited to have been able to participate in this discussion with you today, Marsha, and especially with our audience. They were very, very good questions. So thank you everyone for asking those. Thank you for sharing your thoughts with us. Hopefully this is just the start of this conversation, and we hope that we can continue taking it forward to cover as many sectors and areas of work that we can. Today was such a treat for me, and I hope it was for everyone that's watching as well. So just a couple of announcements before you go. If you have any topics that you would like to see CCWG cover in the future, please drop them in the chat box. We'd love to hear from you. You can also send us a message or an email. Also in the chat box, you'll see a link to join the Climate Change Working Group listserv to stay aware of events and publications. And that's where you can just stay aware of all the things that we're doing and possibly become a part of all the things that we're doing. So thank you again for joining us. Thank you, Marsha, for all of your insightful thoughts. I hope you have a fantastic day or afternoon or evening, wherever you are, and a great weekend as well. And we'll see you guys in the next time.
Thank you so much, Renee. It was a pleasure as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Have a good night.
Thanks. Enjoy. Bye.
Bye.